Welcome to the Conscious Dominance Podcast, where Andrew and Eric, two dominant men in dom-sub relationships, discuss how we approach our dominant roles from a conscious and loving place, and what we learn about ourselves through the deep intimacy that these power exchange dynamics make possible. Sit back and enjoy the show.
That's half of the year. So we've been doing this for 6 months, and we haven't missed a week.
Nope.
It started back in late March, I believe.
We started recording and then released, I think, the beginning of April.
I think it was like the first week in April was our first release. And these last 6 months were an extremely challenging 6 months for me on a personal level. Extremely challenging. I hinted at some of that when we were speaking, but this podcast has provided a consistent container and structure for me to show up to that I could count on every week, where I had skin in the game, where there was accountability, that I had to come out there and show up in the middle of a time where I was physically in a really tough situation with my shoulder injury that's still challenging for me, and then financially in a tough situation. And because of those two things, my relationship, it was challenging. It's challenging to be in polarity when you are injured and a lot of pain, and when you are financially struggling. Being forced to show up to that every week was challenging, but I just want to say thank you. I want to say thank you to our audience, for everybody that's out there that's listened to us for these 26 weeks, and for the comments and for the emails, for all of it. It's meant a lot. This is the first time I've ever done something. I've been online before, but I haven't had a podcast before, and I haven't put myself out here with this much consistency or with this much vulnerability. I appreciate it. So thank you. Thank you to you, and thank you to everybody.
Yeah, it has been really cool, and it's been fun for me because it was about 6 months before we started doing this that Dawn and I started doing the Dom Sub Devotion podcast. So when we added this, now I was showing up twice every week. And what I realized when we got started in this is that my ability to speak with you guy to guy is way different than what I get to talk about on the podcast with Dawn, where it's the two of us and it's our relationship, and it's a completely different side of me that I get to bring here than what I get to bring there. And so it's fun to have both of these outlets for me. And that's been one of the coolest things for me, besides what is far and away the coolest is seeing how you've evolved over the 6 months, like just watching, knowing even more than what you've shared publicly here, but how deeply confronting so much of what you've been going through while you've been showing up here. It's been really fun to watch how that comes across as you, like, your energy, it's just settled.
Yeah, thank you. Commitments that you don't break are so important. And I feel like it's one of the key things for me. It transforms you. It changes you. And you do it regardless of whether or not you feel like it, how sick you are, whatever it is. This idea of showing up. My dad said this when I was growing up, that I said he does well in his life. And I asked him, I said, what do you owe that to? And he said, I show up. And he meant that he shows up on time. He shows up early. He stays for the full extent of the time. He shows up. And that idea of showing up is, don't ever think that's not a big deal. We should value showing up. And I think showing up to our commitments, showing up to our women, bare minimum, but don't knock the bare minimum. That's important. And
you don't get to play if you don't go through the door.
Exactly. You don't get to be in the ring if you don't show up. You don't get to be play the game unless you show up. The show up. And we've shown up. We've shown up to this. I've shown up to you, you've shown up to me, and that's powerful. And if you can increase the things that you show up to, that are these commitments that you show up, and I show up to my relationship with Rachel, I show up to my home, to my children, to my responsibilities, and it changes you. And I think when we can add something that we show up to where we're being seen by other people and witnessed, that's what I mean by skin in the game. Because if you don't show up, it matters. And we need to find things in our life that where if we don't show up, it matters. And first person we need to show up to is ourself. But then after that, we that circle can get bigger. But the most important person to show up to is to ourselves, to be there for ourselves. And that's what this podcast was about, I feel like, was
Well,
how do we show up to ourselves?
I love Jocko Willink uses this line: discipline equals freedom.
Mm-hmm.
And if that feels like, that statement to me used to feel like a crushing burden to consider discipline equaling freedom, because I felt so unfree, and doing more shit felt like it would overwhelm me
Mm-hmm.
because of how overwhelmed I felt inside. And everything with doing this kind of a business that calls you to, for example, put out an episode every week. Yeah, it's you and I having this conversation, but then it's the editing, then it's the publishing, it's writing the show notes, it's all of the other stuff that goes on behind the scenes, and all of it has to get done in order for this episode to pop onto people's YouTubes and into their podcast players every week. This is our job as men, is to show up and do the work, to be disciplined with our commitments, even if you don't want to.
Mm-hmm.
That is not self-abandonment. That is not self-sacrifice. This, if we do the showing up begrudgingly and we feel like we're a victim of it, then we're missing the whole point. It is the freedom that we gain by disciplining ourselves and getting our shit in line, doing what we say we're going to do, and then making the things we say we're going to do meaningful and important to us. We're never sacrificing to that end. We are growing to that end through the discipline of showing up and participating in our life.
I like that you use the word discipline, because I feel like in some ways showing up is step one of discipline. If you want to be disciplined, step one should read show up.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can improve upon that. But you can't improve upon something that you're not showing up to. So if a habit, show up to the habit.
Yep.
And I think about James Clear when he talks about these habits that we have. The first thing to do is establish the habit. Second thing to do, improve the habit. But you can't improve a habit you don't actually have. And I think one of the things that you and I in this podcast is, we haven't made money off of this podcast. We're not showing up. If we don't show up, it really didn't matter, except for a couple hundred people that would listen to this, and they might not even notice. But that's the point, is you show up to things that even don't seem like a big deal because you made a commitment to someone else, from me to you. And we've made a commitment to this. Those couple hundred people matter. And we made a commitment to show up every week. We said we were going to do that when we showed up to that. And that's part of the discipline. And it's living what we actually speak about as well. And I love the word discipline, and the discipline giving freedom. I feel healing because of this podcast. So I feel more freedom in a sense because of the showing up. I feel closer to you. I feel closer to the language conscious dominance. I feel like I have a deeper understanding it, but because of what we've done to explore it, I feel ready to take a little break, which we'll talk about what we're going to do. And then we're going to come. We showed up for 6 months. We showed up every week for 26 weeks. And it's been a beautiful 26 weeks. I thought that we could use this time to talk about showing up, and also just to reflect a little bit about these last 6 months and what that's meant to us and to you.
I think the biggest thing that all of this has meant to me is changing the paradigm around what it means to be a dom and what these dom sub dynamics really are and can be for people. Look how transformative it's been for you. Look how transformative it's been for me. By the time this episode comes out, it'll be pretty close to 6 years since I asked my wife to be my submissive, and how much of me has transformed, how much of who I thought I was has had to burn off and die and go away so I could grow and become more of who I am and more true to myself because of what this relationship and the intimacy of this relationship has really brought into my life. The fact that I get to show up here with you and have these conversations, and it's impacting other people in a way that is helping to show them that they can step into the life and the kind of relationship that they want and have it be good for them and for their partner. It's really, when we do this with consciousness, with awareness, this is making our lives better. And it means so damn much to me every time that somebody tells us that they've been impacted somehow and see that it's possible that they could actually have the life and the love and the relationship that they want. That's why I do it all.
It's very powerful. I feel just even the word power, I think it's reclaiming the word power, reclaiming that as a vital part of what it is to be a man and to be in relationship with a woman, to stand in our power. And that standing in our power doesn't inherently mean that we are going to abuse someone with that power. And I think a lot of women and men out there in the world assume that if you're in some sort of DS relationship, or if you embrace the word dominance, that you are going to be abusive to the person that you are with. And that's a given out in the DS community. That's not the case, but that's a subsect of our society and our culture that people embrace, and they recognize these terms and they recognize this to be true. But outside of the community of BDSM and that languaging, in the mainstream culture, we have really taken the word power and dominance and the masculine energy and almost equated it with something that's negative, something that we have to diminish. Yeah, that's negative, and that is a problem. And I think both of us are here saying, no, no, we want to reclaim that word. We want to reclaim our nature. We want to reclaim what it is to be a man, what it is to stand in our power, to be in a relationship with a woman who respects us in that power, who respects our voice, who respects us standing up for who we are and what we're about, and that we can do it in a conscious way that also respects her voice and that respects her as a human being, and they're not mutually exclusive. And that because we both are in a relationship where we're actually doing that, we can talk about it, speak about it, and it's powerful. And it's a powerful construct to come back to every week to say, hey, how are we doing? And it was very difficult for me to do this. And that's the point.
Yeah.
The point is, it's not easy. And I think it was showing up to you every week, just being like, I see you, buddy. I know it's tough. It's enough. We don't need a whole lot. We just need one person out there that's, I see you working hard. That's it. They don't even need to say anything
Yeah.
more than that. And I feel like we can be that for other people as well, and for other men, because you're not needing to go to your woman for that. And sometimes that is actually the wrong person to go to. We need to have other men, other places, even if they're just online and we don't know them, to go to and say, hey, I see you working hard.
It's bringing truth back to them, because of like the meanings underneath all of this stuff has been so just fucked up. And being able to come back here and say, you know what the truth is? That somebody, for example, needs to be in control in a relationship. If no one's in charge, if no one's leading, things don't go well. Look at a business. If there was no one making decisions, everyone would show up for work, and how would they even know what to do? Bringing some truth back to the fact that things like power and control and dominance and submission don't have to be negatives, like you said. I think it's really telling that one of the most popular episodes that Dawn and I ever recorded was the one that we titled How I Control My Submissive. And in that whole episode, we talked about the word control and what it means to us and how I do take control of Dawn's life. But I don't do it in a way that limits her. I do it in a way that I'm trying to control the parts of her life that she has used to shut herself down, to keep herself small. I'm looking out for her and I'm taking care of her. And so why did so many people go to that episode? It gets probably 5 times more popular than any other episode we've released in the last 6 months, because there's something about us that wants that. This is where I think we've said it here before. Kinks are pointing at a deeper truth. And this kink for control that people have, both taking control and giving up control, is pointing at a deeper truth of something that they really need.
That's true.
And being able to show them that it's possible, that this is not just a kink 100% and it's fun, but also it's deeply meaningful when you really get into it with awareness and you use that control not just for kink, but also, for example, if she's committed to obey me and I use that control to make her life better. Now we get both. I'm in control and her life is getting better by giving up control.
We have a dynamic in our relationship where I have authority and control.
Oh, that's another good word.
Authority. And what it does is when things aren't going well, I can't blame her. And I think most men want this, right? It seems like if you're listening to this, there's a longing for this. But be prepared for growth, because there's no way to do this and not grow. You could try, but it's not going to go well. So when you have authority over someone else, it forces you to grow. And I feel like that's been one of the biggest lessons for me in this experience, has been the enforced growth that's built into this at all times. And especially when you have a woman who is in her voice, is in her place, and is in her truth. She's going to be speaking things that are uncomfortable for you to hear. It's uncomfortable for me to hear. It's uncomfortable for me to see that she's struggling, or that she's overwhelmed, or that she's unclear, because it seems like it may be an indictment on my leadership or on my authority or any of that. And so I have to be able to witness all of that, and at the same time not try to come in and fix it and control it. There has to be this capacity. When you talk about control, it's also, this is where the art gets into it, and we've talked about this, but it's not about fixing it in the moment so you feel better, I feel better. It's also about seeing the larger, bigger picture. And so a lot of what I've learned is it's not about controlling her, it's about controlling my response and my reactivity and my whoosh, and whether or not I react in the moment. And if I can be dominant in controlling that, then I'm able to know what to do in the moment to hold her and lead her. And we've talked at length about this, but that, learning that as a habit, I still don't do it perfect all the way. Like today, there was something that happened earlier this morning, and she said something that was upsetting to me, and I bit her, like I snapped at her, like in a way that was like I was a jerk and I was an asshole, and I didn't hold space for her, and I interrupted her and I yelled at her in a way. It was like, it reminded me of my grandpa, who would just talk to my grandma as though she was just like nothing.
So how do you handle that now versus how you handled that in the past when you spoke to her that way? And how have you evolved in that? How is it different for you?
Well, first of all, I'm aware that's not what I want to be doing. So the first thing is, as I'm doing it, I'm aware, and I'm like, fuck. And then we are also busy and there are other things going on. So I had to walk away. And one of the big things for me is to not try to go fix it until I'm out of my emotional field. And I think so the biggest transformation for me is that before I might do something like that, and then I go back to her and try to fix it and make it feel better. and apologize, but I'm in the energy, like I'm needing her to change so I feel better. I have to get to a place where I don't need her to change or I don't need her to feel better. I have to feel better and stronger. And that depends on how long that takes. And the same thing happened yesterday where I got upset at her. So I still have this part of me. Part of all this starts from a very innate, natural part of me that is by nature aggressive, loud, and domineering. And I scored very high on the D on the test that you do with Tony Robbins and those like DIC and
Mhm.
all of that. For me, it's not been about how to be more assertive and more control. It's about how to do that artfully and how to do that consciously. And that's been my biggest learning curve for this because I naturally want to come in and just assert and control, but I could do it like a stupidly and without awareness and like a bludgeon. And that's been my issue.
Well, so I want to challenge you on something there.
Yes.
Because to say that is what comes naturally or that's your nature, is it?
Mm-hmm.
Or is that your nurture? Is it your
That's a
cunning
good
or is
point.
it your
I think that
authenticity?
is my conditioning. I think it is. That is my. Let's say this. That's brilliant, Andrew. Thank you for bringing that up because I think about this. And Rachel's course on the mudroom and the ladder emotional spectrum is really helpful in this. And so, if I want to say, we've talked about this before, but before the line, below the line. So when I'm triggered or in an emotional frequency where I'm below the line, that's my natural way of being, and I think that's derived from trauma, from certain things that happened to me when I was young. That is my fight, flight, or freeze. I'm definitely a fight kind of thing. That it is not a freeze,
Yeah. So it's your
and
programmed response,
it's
but
my program response. And so I think a lot of it is the fight control kind of thing. This has been what this experience has done for me more than anything is to say to myself, I have a choice of how to respond in that moment, to pause and say, my habituated response of fighting, of controlling, is not necessarily the only option in this moment. And so thank you for bringing that up because bringing consciousness to the moment is about bringing myself out of that and then giving myself choice in that moment. And this experience in these last 26 weeks has done more to help me with giving me options in how I habitually respond and how I show up. Let's say it that way. In how I show up in that moment.
I love that you came back to choice there because this is my favorite way that I've maybe ever heard this put is that we don't have tendencies, we don't have habits, we don't have any of these things once we're aware of them. Once we know that it's there, now we're choosing it. Doing the thing that we don't quote unquote want to do, but we are still choosing it. So then we
Mm-hmm.
have to get present with what is the part of me that wants to that actually wants it to be this way.
Mm-hmm.
Because we wouldn't keep doing something when we know that we're doing it and we know we don't want to do it. Like we're aware that we don't want to do it, but we still keep doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So why do we know what we need to do? Why don't we do it? There's some part of us that's still getting something out of that
Mm-hmm.
tendency being there, but it's not a tendency anymore once you know that it's there. Now you are
Mm-hmm.
choosing it and you have to take that kind of responsibility in order to change it. You have to be willing to go, yeah, you know what? There's a part of me that really wants to be a dick. Like that needs to act that way. What's that part of me?
Right.
Okay, well, that's that wounded inner child. And so I think we also do a lot of damage to ourselves with language. And this is why I challenged you on that, because I don't want to see you poison yourself. We're going to be talking in some upcoming episodes about the Four Agreements and that book, but using black magic language, like he says in that book, to say it's in my nature that I react this way.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that.
No, nature. Your nature is not to be a dick. That is your nurture. That is your programming. That was what you learned.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
this is what we get to do by showing up here with each other And why we started this podcast in the first place is we were showing up for these conversations with each other, and then we decided to start recording them.
That's
But
true. And I think part of it too, what can be healing and transformational about this is that part of me that I've thought of as a problem, this a dick or whatever, Rachel actually likes in a sexual context. So this dominating, this dick, this jerk, that energy she finds to be really hot. And how do you play upon that and bring consciousness to that and choose that and really own that and own that moment? And I think that's the gift of when we talk about these kinks. And I think these kinks really often are a way of healing our wounds and our traumas. What you were saying earlier about how this conscious dominance can be really hot and it's also really healing, and it's also a place for us to grow. But the commitment to it, the showing up to it, it has multiple things going on. And in real time, what we're talking about right now is what goes on in our heads when we're journaling, when we're reflecting, because we have a standard that we're trying to live to that says, hey, wait a second, is that? And so there's this inquiry and this constant investigation into these words that we don't accept this word dominance or control or authority just as it is. We're investigating them and we're inquiry about them and we're being curious and that they have different flavors.
It just really hit me that it comes back to something I remember saying to my EMDR therapist when I went through EMDR. When I realized how much of my kink side, my sexuality side, that I had really started to, at that point, even come into acceptance of and enjoy, and started to overcome shame. That's part of my continuing work in progress. But I had a big fear that if I did this work, that I was going to lose my interest in all of the fun that I had learned how to have, even though some of that fun had come out of or come from a coping mechanism to deal with the pain of the trauma that I endured in the past. And I was afraid of losing that. Like, I didn't want to lose that. I liked it. It was fun. And it's been interesting to watch how, as I've coached other men now, almost everyone at some point comes to I don't want to lose that fun part of me. And my therapist, God bless her, she was a 70-year-old woman who had a perm, and she looked like she was straight out of my grandma's house. I absolutely loved the woman. And it was so disarming to be able to talk about kink with someone who's your grandma's age, because she was just like, yeah, you get to keep anything that you want to keep, bring forward anything that you want to bring forward. I remember her name was Jill. I'll never forget it. She's like, you want to spank your wife? Spank your wife.
Yeah, no, it's true. On the other side of consciousness, it's still kinky and it's even more fun. It's even more kinky. It's even better.
You actually enjoy it because you're not using it as a coping mechanism. Now you're doing it because you want to.
You're choosing, as you going back to that word of choice. It's not you're not addicted to it where you feel like, I feel like I've had places in the past where it's like, give me, I must have it. And now it's part of the hotness of it is you get to a point where you're the one saying no. You're the one who's saying, no, not right now. You're not needing it. And that's arousing to her because you're not the one that's always the one pushing it. And you create a place in an environment where she wants to partake and is just hungry. And that is the appropriate polarity.
You create a space where I said earlier that for a man, discipline equals freedom. Well, if we understand that to have polarity, everything has to be equal but opposite. What is that then for our partner? It's not discipline that sets her free. It's obedience. And we have to be able to create a space where she can be safe enough to live a life where she lets go of some of the control and gets to
Mhm.
live in the freedom of not being so damn responsible.
Mhm.
All these things we talk about for men, it is the opposite for women. And whether it makes us comfortable or not, we, for example, if we really want her to be a feminine woman, she can't be a responsible woman. If we want her to be a feminine woman, she can't be a disciplined woman. If we want her to be a feminine woman, she can't be a controlled and emotionally regulated woman.
Mhm. You're saying some pretty radical things there, Andrew.
Uh, you know what? It feels radical until you experience it.
Mhm.
It feels radical to say it to my wife. Things like, I want you to be irresponsible.
Mhm.
I want you to lose control.
Mhm.
But every time that she lets go and allows me to hold her so she can just be free in whatever it is that she's experiencing in the moment,
Mhm.
then things work.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's definitely radical, but it requires for her to, for example, be irresponsible, to not be disciplined, and to let go of control. She needs me to be damn solid in myself.
This only works if you have a relationship where she is disciplined in her devotion to you and in your authority. So when you say don't, you mean for her to not have her own discipline that's outside of your discipline, is what you're essentially saying. Because you are asking her to be disciplined and obedient, but to you, not to an external authority, not to someone else other than you.
And also
Is that
not to
correct?
her interfere,
Not
not
to, right.
to her sense of self-control. Like, it's my job then to be present and attentive enough to set the limit or the edge so she can
Mhm.
just go play, and then
Correct.
to be able to pull her back in
Play or fall apart and cry.
playing too. Sorry guys,
Yeah.
her falling apart and emotional chaos is going to get bigger right along with her joy is going to get bigger, and her sexuality is going to get bigger as she feels more
Mhm.
free, but it's all the same. She just needs me to be able to hold her in and to be even bigger in my strength than she is in her chaos. So I'm
Mhm.
always able to hold whatever she is.
Mhm. No, I agree. And I think part of what I started this whole entire podcast talking about was with these last 6 months is that there's been a lot of doubt that I've had. There's been a lot of pain that I've had. There's been a lot of struggle. And when I'm filled with doubt, pain, and struggle, and when it's obvious and it's clear to my woman, that's not going to put a container. That's going back to the containment episode. That's not a great container for her. You don't want to be on a ship where the captain is filled with doubt. You hear his narrating his struggle, and he's in constant pain every time he tries to do anything. You don't feel great about your leadership on that front. So, how do you navigate a relationship and being in that authority when you're filled with all of those things? That's just been the question that I've lived with. And no man is devoid of that. And I think there's people like Richard Rohr who speaks about the second half of life. And he has this book, he says, Falling Forward. And the notion that when we fall, we really are able to transform ourselves to a point where we are making progress. And I'm really interested in this notion of how do we lead? How do we be consciously dominant while at the same time having doubt, having pain, having struggle, having to show up despite that. And I think this is where this bare minimum of showing up, which I also think of as grit, is a foundational word. And so, even in the midst of all of the struggle, of all of the pain, I never cheated. I never broke my contracts with substances. I never went to my old habits of porn and all these other places. And I never did anything that I used to do. And because of that, I respected this container. I also was really showing up to my commitment to her. That baseline, to all you men out there, when you are struggling and when you're going through it, there is a baseline foundational container that she may not feel the container from you in all the ways that she'd like to, but she can at least know that there's some edges, and that we went up to those edges, and she knows that I'm not going to go past that.
Mhm.
That can be enough to hold a relationship, and for which with which you can bounce up, stand up, and get your erection back, be vertical, and move forward quickly. But if you break through those, there's a lot more you have to work back to get to that starting point of trust. So because I never betrayed her trust, because I never did any of that, as soon as I was able to right my ship, she was ready to go. She was ready to be led by me. And it was really just up to me. And so I want to tell men out there, your commitment, your ethics, your values, the things that you've committed to with your woman, they fucking matter. And they matter more than you realize. They matter. They're a big deal. Your word, your honesty, these things, they matter. And they matter especially when you're going through it, and especially during the hard, challenging, difficult times. They matter. And that's what it means to show up. And so when I say show up as a baseline foundation for conscious dominance, grit, it's showing up with grit and having grace with yourself that you're not able to show up beyond in the fullest extent. So if I've learned anything from these last 6 months, it is that my grit matters, and to have grace with myself, that I can't show up at a 10, but I can show up at a 1. And the 1 sure as fuck matters a lot more than showing up at a -5. I've learned this in physical training. I've learned this with habits. I've learned this with eating. If you want to commit to the gym, show up, bring your shoes, do a little bit. It matters.
Mhm.
If you want to quit drinking, it matters that you don't drink for a long period. It matters. Honor what you can do. Honor the little bit. Honor the little steps. Honor all of this growth, because that's how we're able to build on that and get more and more, and it can get bigger and better. More so than all the other things that I've learned in these last 6 months. I think the thing that I'll never forget is that the grit, the baseline foundational bottom floor of what conscious dominance is, it exists. As long as you can hold the line there, you're good. And that's reassuring in the darkest of moments, that you can always, there's always a baseline that you can hold on to, that you don't go through. It's like if you're in war and you just got to hold that line. And if you just can hold that line, you can come back another day. But if you break that line, it's going to be really hard to come back another day. Find that line.
When you say that it matters, to me, the key to that is that it's not that it matters because of what your woman thinks about it or what you have to do in order to get her to be a certain way.
Yeah.
It's understand that this matters because when you show up for yourself, when you hold to your values, when you hold to your commitments, when no one else is watching, when it's completely secret, when you choose to be who you say that you are,
Mm-hmm.
then you get to feel that way about yourself.
Exactly.
And the energy of having that trust in yourself, having that integrity in yourself,
matters.
That's what matters the most, because now
Mm-hmm.
when you go out into your life, when you go into a relationship with your woman, when you go out into public, you're going to carry yourself with the energy of being the kind of man who has integrity,
Mm-hmm.
who said, for example, I'm not going to drink.
Mm-hmm.
And then was hanging out at home by himself with no one around and that bottle of whiskey sitting on top of the fridge and said, no, I said, I'm not going to drink. I'm not going to drink. And
Mm-hmm.
choosing that. Now you get to, like, that is a level up internally in your own self-trust, in your own integrity, your own sense of responsibility. And it's not about cutting yourself off from these things. It's about how you get to feel about yourself when you hold to your word internally.
Mm-hmm. It does. Pick your lines. It may be different for everyone, and it may be different seasons of it, but whatever you decide your line is, this baseline, that then holds you. It held me during the hardest of times. That's essentially what we mean when we say values. Values matter, and
Yep.
you show up to your values when things are difficult, when they're challenging, when everything else is going crazy haywire, and it's just you with you. And what is it to have these values? And so for me, with you, we had a value of showing up. We showed up and we figured out how to make it so that we would do a couple ahead of time, so that because we knew a couple of weeks we weren't going to be able to be there and do it, so we built that into it, understanding just in general in life you may not be able to show up physically, but you know that you can't show up, so you plan ahead of time and
Yep.
you accommodate yourself in that. And that's part of the grace, and
Responsibility.
it's the responsibility.
Yeah.
So you're still showing up, it's just showing up on a broader context. And I love what you said so much, because it's really about finding the source within ourselves. It's not about the woman. I was coming down to do this podcast, and I was just up with Rachel, and I was thinking about myself in this whole last 6 months. And I was thinking, God, it's really me with me. And it's not about using her as an example of, oh my God, look at this amazing sex life. Look at how awesome she is. Look at all the cool things that I've been able to do with her. That's all true, but it's not what's most exciting to me about it. What's most exciting to me is my own personal relationship with myself, me with me. And it's my own sense of self-respect and self-love and self-honoring that has occurred in these last 6 months, that has been transformational, because it's not something external. I've been through programs, but they've always been someone else's programs. But this was like our program. We created this program, just me and you together, as a commitment to doing this, to showing up week by week.
So I have one last thing that I want to share that's really meaningful to me about doing this podcast and doing it publicly, and sharing what we do so openly about our lives, about this inner work, about being in dom-sub relationships. And that is overcoming shame and helping to remove the stigma around healthy masculine strength, around dominant masculine strength. The shame that people feel about wanting this is so destructive to the exact energy that we need more than anything else in the fucking world right now. And that is men who are brutally strong and who use that strength to take care of the people that they love. And then also to protect them from evil, to protect them from pain.
Claim it.
And when we're in shame about our desire to be strong, we stuff our strength and it comes out sideways. And this is where we get most of the problems we have in the world. Masculinity is necessary. Being able to talk about things like having a relationship where my wife defers to me and obeys me no matter what I tell her to do. And that I'm not ashamed of that. I'm damn proud of it, because I use that power, that authority, that control for good. And that any man who wants to step into that kind of strength, he's going to have some shit to sort through. So to take control is one of the most meaningful things that we get to do, just by owning this side of ourselves and speaking so openly and freely about it. I'm proud and sharing openly about what it is that we live and why we do it and why it's a good thing.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you for your work with Infinite Devotion, and for putting yourself out there in a way that we could find you and that we could be a part of this. And thank you to Rachel for calling me out and saying, you have so much in you that's so wonderful, but can be very unconscious in the way that you dominate. And so calling me forth and calling me forward, which brings me to what I spoke a little bit about at the beginning, which is that we are going to be taking about a month off of this program that we have done, this Conscious Dominance 26 episode last 6 months. And we are going to be having a new season of Conscious Dominance that will be coming out in November. It's going to be on a new platform, and it's going to be a new look. Same two guys, though, me and you. But we also we have a course that's coming. We also have a episode that's going to really get into the pillars of what conscious dominance is, more tactical and more resources.
And yeah, we're going to continue right on going with this, and it's going to be it's going to be some really good stuff. I'm excited for some of what we've already gotten done for it and everything else that's going to come.
Right.
And in this break that we'll be taking here, I'll be relocating. This is the break that is going to be when Dawn and I set sail and become full-time RVers and full-time nomads.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a whole different level of having to have your shit in line.
Yeah, that's going to be awesome. And I'll see you. You'll be in someplace warm next time we get on here.
Record one of these on the beach.
I want to honor you for these last 26 episodes. It's been an awesome experience for me. And I look forward to coming back for our next season with you for Conscious Dominance. And just really deeply appreciate you, Andrew. Thank you. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah. Always my pleasure, my friend.